Welcome to the Docs Who Lift podcast, where we distill and simplify the complexities of a healthy lifestyle, exercise, medicine, and weight loss. We're excited to bring you a podcast that's a prescription for clinical practice, scientific recommendations, and just real life. This is the Docs Who Lift podcast.
Hey, and welcome back to the Docs Who Lift podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Spencer Nadolsky. I got my co-host here, Dr. Karl Nadolsky Jr. And today we're going to be talking about the outrage, it's always outrage, that is of genetics, the genetics of obesity. Now, the reason this comes up, my friends, is because there was a 60 Minutes clip with what's-her-face, I don't remember her name, but on
with
60 Minutes.
Dr. Fatima Cody Stanford.
No, but the interviewer, I don't remember her name, but it doesn't matter. But Dr. Fatima Cody Stanford, who's a Harvard physician, obesity specialist, heavily involved with research, who was saying that, and I don't know how they spliced this up, but basically said the number one cause of obesity is genetics. And you have a 50 to 80% chance of having the disease of obesity if your parents have obesity, even if you have an optimal lifestyle. And the interviewer, whatever her name is, was like, really? Wow. Okay. So the outrage, that's
Leslie Stahl.
Leslie Stahl.
Leslie Stahl.
Yeah. Everybody on my comments, were like, she's always blowing up media, whatever. It doesn't matter. So the thing to understand.
Oh, they said that about Leslie Stahl.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not into the whole media thing, but anyway, she's known for doing whatever. But who knows? It's a big corporation. I'm not sure what the deal is. Dr. Stanford's a very smart person, a physician researcher. So we don't think that she's saying that environment and food don't matter. I think it's possible the way that the clip was construed was done so in a way to make it more extreme. I'm not.
And sure. And also, I mean, you got to think she's sitting there under the spotlight with a nationally, recognized, globally watched program.
Yeah.
Right. And all of us who are in the obesity space are trying to convey to the public that our genetics are a huge problem. Right.
Yeah.
And because there's so much antagonism out
bias,
there,
stigma
against medications and surgery. Yeah, there's a ton of obesity bias and stigma. And so I can imagine in her mind, she's out there to try to focus on, yes, our genetics are a really big problem as to why this is a problem right now. And how it came out, sounded a little bit more extreme. And yeah, who knows what they did with the sound bites and whatever to make it even more extreme. But I'm very confident knowing her a little bit. And I've even talked with her on some.
You were just on a few interviews with her.
Yeah, I was just on a MedPage Today interview with her, a month or two ago.
Literally chatting together.
Yeah. And, and she's we're on very much the same page. Yeah. And I guarantee she's about knows. Emphasizing lifestyle. There is a lot of nuance, though, when we dig into these statistics, talking about genetic science and epidemiology and all these things. It's complex and it's not black and white.
Right. So here's the deal. Not everybody, tons of people on the internet were outraged. They're like, are you kidding me? Our genes did not change over the past 50 years. And so I did a little video for this for Instagram and a few other things, and basically showed here's the prevalence 1975. It just shows this huge increase in prevalence since 1975, and people show the pictures of the beach in the 1950s compared to now and all this stuff, which that's not good data. We should look at the actual statistics there, like in the graph. And so I posed the question, did our genetics change over the past 50 years? And everybody said no. I made these little polls. And so then what caused the change in adiposity or obesity prevalence? And everybody said the environment. True. And so then I switched it up and basically posed but what about those people that are very lean despite having no effort and living in our current environment and having a poor lifestyle? What caused them to stay lean? And everybody said, well, it's their genetics. So So it's
it's a bias.
It's a bias.
It exposes the bias. I will also point out, how the hell you have time to do this? Because I didn't even see this poll you said you posted. So how you have time to do
because
that?
Because I'm a meme doctor.
No, of course.
Yeah, I mean, so it was very important because it's that's how I kind of spread awareness. Now, granted, the thing is, it's like, well, but of course the environment caused it because that's the only thing that changed in 1975. It's like, no, the thing is, there's something called a gene environment interaction. So we talk about this. George Bray, he's the first one I heard ever say this.
Yeah,
but
it is. Well, I looked it up to make sure that it seemed to be correlated, and it does.
Genetics.
It does.
We call it genetics. Load the gun. The environment pulls the trigger. Like, so if we all lived in the same environment we did in the 1960s or 50s and below, obesity, like if we lived back then, the obesity wouldn't be prevalent. The thing is, the way our genes work and how it interacts with the environment is that, like, people still had variability in their adiposity and body composition back then. It was just small variations. When you introduce this new environment, those who are really prone to the obesity still had higher weights back then, higher adiposity back then, just small little changes though. Then it gets exaggerated when you put people into this obesogenic environment. What we would say mostly easily overeaten, very yummy, high calorie foods, among other things. There's other
the processed foods, the hyper palatable foods, and maybe even endocrine disrupting chemicals. All these other things.
Maybe it all adds up. I don't know. So I think what people don't understand, they're like, okay, nobody forced that person to go to McDonald's 3 times a week, though. Nobody forced that person to eat a donut instead of the apple for lunchtime
and drink sugary beverages.
And so you might be sitting there. Some people might be listening, going, "Yeah, that's true. Like, nobody's forcing them to do it." Unless you have experienced it, you don't really understand. And like I technically, from a BMI, I think it was around 30 in college because I was a heavyweight, but I forced myself up there. My genetics, I'm naturally a leaner guy, but I've had so many patients explain what they call the food noise. And imagine you have like an itch that, like, some people, it kind of goes away pretty easily. Other people, it kind of gets stronger and stronger. You just have to scratch it. Imagine that, but in your brain, it's like it's drawing you towards these foods that otherwise wouldn't be available back in the day at very high portions throughout. So imagine having that drive all the time into where it's like you give in.
Yeah, being always exposed to them, like it's readily available.
Yeah. So I always talk about Donut Dan. Donut Dan comes to your office, and you're like, I'm trying to stay lean, or I'm trying to lose weight and keep it off. And you have your apple, you have your protein shake, whatever. And Donut Dan comes in, and you might be able to stay away from it for a while until it's just always there, and it's calling to you. That's kind of the environment. You can do your best to try to stay away from it, and you can work towards it. But it's like it's this voice, it's that food noise saying, "Go eat it, go eat it," and you can try to fight against that. But those with these genetics that kind of predispose, they are at higher risk now,
and maybe altered, metabolic flexibility and all that stuff too. And then you combine it with the differences in physical activity and lifestyle, and it throws a whole nother different.
The one thing we do want to address, though, is that the part where she said, even with an optimal lifestyle, and I think my brother put it best. We're getting interviewed by lots of journalists, and so if you're a journalist listening to this, we're always available to take really fun quotes from us, but
usually available.
I'm always available because I'll make a meme about it right afterwards. But the thing is, what she probably should have said, and again, this is the media being in the spotlight, is optimal diet and lifestyle efforts, like even with your optimal efforts, because despite your effort, it can be extremely hard to follow.
Effort's different than actually
doing
it being done, especially the dietary part.
I think so. I like that quote that you gave one of the reporters, because I think that pulls in the nuance of like I think that's what she probably meant, because there's no way. If you're in a calorie deficit, and this is why people say, if you're in a calorie deficit, you're going to lose weight despite your genetics. And that's technically true.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you have some lipodystrophy and that it plays
and that's a totally different. That's not even what we're talking about.
That's not even that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about common obesity, or even.
Well, we can talk about the spectrum of genetic predisposition next.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So basically, if you're in a calorie deficit, you're going to lose fat. It doesn't matter like your genetics in general. I will say. And so like when you say like even with an optimal lifestyle, it's like, well, technically an optimal lifestyle, we'd be back in the 50s when nobody where the obesity prevalence was low.
Or 1,000 years ago when we die of bacterial disease at age 34.
Yeah, unfortunately. So we would be.
So yeah, and so okay, so let's talk about the spectrum of genetic predisposition to obesity, because I think this maybe is where the nuance needs to be discussed a little bit. Because you get these sound bites on 60 Minutes and then it's like one extreme or the other, and it's not black or white. So on one end of the spectrum, and we did do a podcast on some of the monogenic obesities, right? Or did we not really?
I don't think so.
Can't remember. I don't think so. So on one end of the spectrum, we do have these relatively rare, maybe not as rare as what we once thought, genetic mutations in single genes up in the area of our hypothalamus in our brain that really controls mostly the appetite, lack of satiety, etc., not so much of the metabolism. And those are relatively rare. And those types of patients, they may have other problems, learning disabilities, different types of, reduced cognition and some other medical complications. And then there are some what we call syndromic disorders that are over on that side of the spectrum, one of which people might know of about Prader-Willi, where these kids, they develop significant appetite and hunger issues early in life, soon after birth.
Yeah, we talked about this in the pediatric guideline, our first pediatric guideline, where people have to lock their cabinets.
And that's literally like a treatment for Prader-Willi, right? That's what I think that's like recommended. I mean, I remember people talking about this. And again, we just talked to a pediatrician. I'm not a pediatrician for sure, but I do end up seeing these patients when they're adults. And now we have a very specific medication that does help to bridge the gap for some of those genetic monogenic diseases of obesity. But those kids have severe obesity at youth. Mm-hmm. No matter what the parents try to do, the kids will seek and find energy to take in that overwhelms their energy balance, putting them at high adiposity and growth, and then the risk of the obesity related complications as they get older. And luckily now we do it. We have a special medication that bridges some of those gaps, not all of them, mind you, called setmelanotide. That's good for, melanocortin 4. No, people don't care.
It doesn't matter.
This, but
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. But then you have this spectrum. So then there are like heterozygous mutations of some of these that are a little bit down the spectrum a little bit. And then you have what I would consider maybe almost the bell-shaped curve, the most of the population, but there's this huge spectrum of these, genetic differences in all the different genes that play a role. So they call it polygenic, right? So poly meaning many different genes working against people. And that's a huge spectrum. Some people really struggle with it, some people not so much. And that's where lifestyle efforts we've seen in some of these, what they call genome-wide association studies, can help mitigate that. Now, but it's not perfect. I think if you look at the statistics, it's like the exercise and nutrition interactions, that what you call the gene environment interactions, it can mitigate, like something like 40%. I think I saw that statistic. Yeah. So there are still those who, despite what we think is an optimal effort at diet and exercise, et cetera, they're still going to have obesity. And we see that in some of the twin studies, which actually twin studies are a good example for people like the lay people to understand. Yeah. And we have a lot of data for twins that are separated at birth. It's amazing how much data we have from this. And despite having completely different upbringings and living lifestyles and all this stuff, they end up having the very, very similar builds.
Similar weights.
Very similar builds, very similar weights, very similar physiques, despite what they're doing. And then if you go all the way to the other side of the spectrum, suddenly we get the people that everyone complains about. Well, my God, that guy doesn't do anything. He eats like garbage, doesn't exercise, and yet somehow he maintains
lean.
This a lean physique.
Almost underweight, and sometimes
right. And now it might not be healthy. mind you, right? But we're talking about adiposity. And so for whatever reason, in their genetics, it predisposes them to really balance out that sort of that energy balance set point we always talk about, where, if they overeat, then suddenly they're going to undereat. Their metabolism kind of tries to match it, and they stay very low fat or skinny or whatever it is. It kind of gets into the, growing up, being into weightlifting and all that stuff. You always hear about the hard gainers, guys trying to gain weight, and there's some who just stay kind of skinny and it's hard to gain weight. Yeah. It's the same thing. The genetics they're powerful.
Yeah. Appetite. So imagine someone that just eats McDonald's all the time, but they don't gain weight. A lot of it is because they don't actually eat as much as we think they do. They may eat one meal at McDonald's, and the rest of their day, it's like they're eating maybe 2,000 calories in the day. Yeah. They may have, when you do overfeeding studies in some of these individuals, they have resistance to gaining adiposity. They may increase their non-exercise activity thermogenesis. There's lots of different mechanisms.
What we call fidgety. They're just fidgety. They're always moving, even though they're not exercising. They're just moving around.
Some of the data even shows they may not absorb as many calories, so they're just pooping it out. All sorts of different things.
That gets into the gut microbiome. There is something to that people always talk about. We don't know how to do anything with that yet. But.
Interesting stuff. So this is where I think the stigma is strong, where it's like, no, this is a self-responsibility. And it needs to be taken care of by the individual. Whatever happened to self-responsibility? It's like, well, what about these people that are resistant to obesity? They're okay. They're fine.
Yeah. They don't get a free pass, even though they might not be healthy. They might be doing things that are very unhealthy.
So, and we're not saying that you're doomed to your genetics. That's the other thing. It's a straw man. They're like, oh, you're saying we should give up. It's like, no, just understand that people are having differences in the toughness and ability to stick to a certain lifestyle given a certain environment. Again, if we could all go back in time and live in an era where this food wasn't readily available, we didn't have certain technologies we have today, which I would never want. I actually love living in today's life. Everybody thinks everything's getting worse. I think everything's getting better.
I don't know. The technology seems to screw me over every day. I just got locked out of Facebook again because I think someone's trying to hack me to post quackery or something. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's because you went onto some.
This should be good.
To some seedy websites.
That was so obviously about to come out of your mouth. Everyone knew it. Anybody listening to this knew that was coming.
We all knew it's true. It's not. You can't even deny it. You're laughing because it's true. In fact, I can see the vortex going on through the screen right now.
Oh my God! I just got fired again.
But I love the fact that I can order. First of all, right now I'm living in a rural area. It's not for long. 6 months, I'm going to be out of here. I want to be able to order shawarma straight to my door in 20 minutes by a few flicks of my thumb.
This is part of our obesogenic environment.
A few flicks of my thumb.
That's not a good thing.
No, but I want to be able to do it. Now, the problem is, though, it's a flip. I have favorable genetics and favorable habits built from our childhood.
Right.
I can get away with this, and I love shawarma. Right. I'll throw that garlic freaking olive oil stuff all over my food and just high amounts of fat. Take my statin and ezetimibe and everything else. Just kidding. But anyway, I can do this. But those with obesity related genes, it's strong. I've done podcasts with patients actually, and we should get them on this podcast. But they describe it in certain ways where now they're on one of these GLP-1 medicines where it's like it stopped they call it the food noise. Like I can now just do what I know I need to do. I know people know.
They feel they say they feel normal, or they say this is what it's like to feel normal. Yeah. Wow. It's fascinating and enlightening.
You don't have to be an obesity specialist endocrinologist to know that, hey, maybe we should probably be eating broccoli instead of those French fries. Does it take? I don't think it takes a genius to know that. Most people know this stuff, and most people didn't even have to know it back when our environments were shaped a certain way. It just I like the book Switch. I believe it's that book Switch where we talk about how we're riding an elephant, and we can have some little control over where we go, but it's not like a horse. The elephants are going to go in the path that that's made for them. So they talk about shaping your environment. Our environment is really hard to shape on a macro level. Like how we're going to shape it. We're going to have to do food policies and all sorts of different stuff. So you give them a medicine that helps them then control their own path and walk through this path. It's an interesting thing.
On the other hand, so to go back to a little bit of the counterpoint of what came across from Dr. Fatima Stanford is, when it sounded like she said, despite an optimal lifestyle. So back to the genome wide association studies, the FTO loci, whatever, and 40 to 50% or whatever, we really can do a lot of good for preventing obesity with lifestyle efforts. So improving, our nutrition, the habits, our exercise habits from an early age. We really need to find a way to do a better job of prevention, because it's much easier to prevent than to treat. And that's where, the problem. Once people have obesity, especially when you have the genetic predisposition, it is really hard. The biology, obesity protects obesity. And that gets into the set points that we've talked about. Now, and then on the other hand, there are some who very clearly are able to change their lifestyle and respond to it well, and then do great. But it's actually probably the minority based on the studies. It's more like,
by far,
15 to 30% of people in the studies can really do that to a meaningful degree. So
on a short-term level, by the way,
this is so much more complex than anybody gives credit to. And it's a huge spectrum of genetic risk, all the way from really there's not much you can do about it without addressing the genetic deficiencies, to those who can get away with seemingly poor lifestyle choices and not have excess adiposity. Again, health matters despite what your weight is, though. So lifestyle always matters.
Yep,
always.
Absolutely. And I think we need to make sure we do continue to focus on it without stigmatizing or shaming those who are just having a hard time sticking to it. And that's it. So, hopefully people got a sense after listening to this, the issues of the genetics. It doesn't mean you're doomed, again, unless you have one of those monogenic deletions, which is pretty rare. Most people with common polygenic genetics for obesity, you're not doomed if you have a good lifestyle, but it may make things tougher. There are tools, GLP-1 agonists, other types of medicines that may be able to help if needed. But again, I think we just wanted to address the outrage and all this type of stuff. So anything else, Dr. Karl?
No, I think that's right on the money. And I don't know, maybe I feel like we could illustrate graphically this spectrum of genetic risk and stuff. I don't know that I've seen anything like that out there.
Yeah, there's a few things out there.
Something like that. But
cool.
Maybe we can post a picture with this or something.
Very good. All right, here's our outro.
This podcast is for entertainment and education and information purposes only. Remember, the physicians on this podcast are not your physician. It should not be considered professional or personalized medical advice. It should not be used to replace speaking with your physician or medical professional to discuss your specific health concerns. The topics discussed should not be used solely to diagnose or treat any condition. As a result, we are not responsible for any unwanted medical outcomes. The views and opinions discussed are of those of the host only and do not represent those of any other entities.